And this bolder vision came very timely in terms of discussion when we celebrated the 50 years, the jubilee of the OAU-AU. And it was out of that discussion that the heads of state in Africa decided in 2013, in the next 50 years, which gets us to 2063, we really want a different Africa. We are going to be about 30% of the world population. And if we are going to be that sizable, we also need to have a sizable economic presence. We need to have a sizable understanding of the world that Africa is no longer going to be the residual deposit of some aid, of some poverty reduction programs. Is going to be a key actor for the future.
Agenda 2063 also identifies key activities to be undertaken in its 10-year implementation plans, which will ensure it delivers both quantitative and qualitative transformational outcomes for Africans. The flagship projects of Agenda 2063 refers to key programs and initiatives which have been identified as key to accelerating Africa's economic growth and development, as well as promoting its common identity by celebrating African history and its vibrant culture.
It is important to find a way to make sure that you have some kind of synergy and some kind of coherence between what is being done at the continental level and what is being done at the country level. And so this is where the challenge is. I think the way to go, and I believe the African Union Commission is also looking at this in the same way, that we have to find a way to domesticate the Agenda 2063. In other words, to find a way to integrate its principles at the country level. Because after all, the AU is not going to implement Agenda 2063. It can help to galvanize support and coordinate and maybe monitor, but the countries eventually will be the ones to implement it. But so the major point I'm making here is that these are not conflicting things that you say, I'm doing this, I'm going to do that, because the countries want to develop infrastructure. They want to make sure that they have employment for young people. They want to reduce poverty. You have an Agenda 50-year plan that you want to implement. Do you have the capacity to do that? This is the question ACBF has asked. And ACBF is trying to help the African Union to respond to that question. I don't want to answer the question because we're in the process of determining whether or not that capacity is there. But one thing we know for sure is that one of the challenges, or one of the issues, or the reasons why previous plans have not been implemented is because of lack of capacity or inadequate capacity. And I'm talking about human capacity at the individual level. I'm talking about institutional capacity. And I'm also talking about organizational and capacity in the society as well. And I'm also talking about not just the skills the individuals have or the capabilities they have to do things and do them properly, make policies and implement them and take initiatives. But I'm also talking about the other, what they call the soft skills, which is things like having self-confidence, because development is not just a technical exercise. It is also an exercise that requires people to actually have a belief that they can actually develop. And for a long time, African countries have been lacking the confidence to think that they can actually do some things themselves. It's only when they began to see what was happening in some of the Asian countries that they say, well, wait a minute, if they can do it, we can also do it. And so that kind of capacity is also very important. It's as important as having the number of engineers that you need that are of high quality and that you can retain here and they can contribute in development. But also other things like attitudes of people, your attitudes towards development.
Besides the successes, however, there are scrambles for its resources in the face of changing global demands and demographics. There is also undue external influence in the affairs of the continent, Africa's disproportionate burden of the impact of climate change, and the huge scale of illicit outflow of African resources and capital could also be cited. More specifically, the key threats are conflict, instability and insecurity, social and economic inequality, organized crime, drugs trade, and illicit financial flow, poor management of diversities, religious extremism, ethnicism and corruption, failure to harness the demographic dividend, escalation of Africa's disease burden, climate risks and natural disasters, external shocks, example caused by global market forces. This year's summit is going to happen right immediately at the end of the first 10 years of the 50-year agenda. The world, especially Africans, are waiting heads of states who are going to attend the summit.
Cada tua filha, uma ilha, pétala na água salgada, na
the government, first ladies, heads of state, excellence government,
Well, the viewers, in our trending stories, we will also focus on Agenda 2063, which is one of the initiatives spearheaded by the African Union to create a more prosperous continent. And here in the studio, I'm joined by my colleague, Johannes van Touwen, to tell us more about this. Johannes, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, what more can you tell us about Agenda 2063?
Okay, thank you, Shafee. As you said, Agenda 2063 is a plan for the overall growth of Africa. It's recall that it was first launched in 2013 while the Union was celebrating its the Jubilee, Golden Jubilee year. So it is a 50 years plan, and it has five phases with each 10 years. And this year's summit is going to happen while the first 10-year plan is going to end, because it's going to end in the next year, 2023. So it's a plan for the entire African economic growth. It has encompasses some other issues like integrated high-speed train network, African commodities strategy, and it also encompasses African continental free trade area. And there are also lots of issues which this agenda cooperates or tries to do.
Right.
So even this year's agenda, which is about the building resilience in nutrition on African continent, and also it's a plan to accelerate the human capital, social and economic development. This is the issue of the 35th African Summit, the Union Summit. So when we see this topic, this is very important, because according to the data from the African Developmental Bank, Africa, one of the three Africans, especially under the age of 5, are in the problem of malnutrition. So, for example, when we see in terms of regions, for example, North African, 17.3 children are in the problem of impaired growth or undergrowth, underdevelopment. East Africa, which is the highest scorer, 35.6 children in East Africa are under development. So Africans need a great plan, a great leadership which can overcome these problems. So the issue of this 35th AU Summit is very crucial, and African leaders are expected to decide some important solutions to overcome this problem. And the other issue is, which is related to the especially young peoples, young peoples of Africa. As you know, Africa is the youngest continent in the world. There are some data which says Africa is even the overall population of the, or in average, Africa is under 20 years. Africans are under 20 years, which is 19.7. When we come to Latin America and the Caribbeans, it is 31. The average, their average age is 31 years. Asia, 32. Oceania, 33. Northern America, 38. And Europe, the oldest continent, 42 age. So young Africans are expecting, because Africa is the youngest continent,
we young Africans are expecting these leaders to come up with a very specific decision which can help us to develop ourselves, to develop young Africans, not only young Africans, but also the overall continent, because the Union or the summit or leaders of Africa are not expected to talk about only issues related to the continent.
Right.
But they are expected to bring African issues to the global arena. For example, they are our representatives. They need to represent us in the global arena, like, for example, in the UN Security Council.
Yeah.
For example, in the No More movement, some African countries and some African leaders, in addition, our leader also trying to say something about having a veto power status in the UN Security Council.
Right.
This is not easy question. We are asking them to represent us in the global way, the global way.
Okay.
But they have to work these continent-wide issues in order to help Africans, young Africans, and other Africans, women to develop and to make a prosperous Africa.
Right.
So that's what I have for.
Well, Johannes, thank you so much for your ideas.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, now moving on, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma is an undisputable trailblazer in the uplifting and empowerment of women across the African continent. Particularly, Dlamini-Zuma had a great contribution to amplifying Agenda 2063 when she was the chair of the African Union. And she has taken pushing measures that promote gender equality on her tenure at the African Union. Let's take a look at the following story that goes through her profile. Take a look.
Nkosazana Clarice Dlamini-Zuma is a South African politician, doctor, and anti-apartheid activist. Zuma was born on 27 January 1949 in KwaZulu-Natal. An active underground member of the ANC and a member of the South African Students' Organization, Zuma was elected as its deputy president in 1976. From July 2012 to 2017, Zuma has worked as a chairperson of the African Union Commission. She was the first woman to lead the continental organization, including its predecessor, the Organization of African Unity. This was a major achievement in the sense that for the first time since the formation of the Organization for African Unity, OAU, which became the African Union, a woman and indeed a candidate of the southern region was successfully elected to the top job.
It's never been held by a woman, and it will never be held by a woman if women do not stand for elections. Whether they lose or win, but they must stand until they win.
Moreover, her career as a struggle activist and a politician is testimony to her indestructible and courageous spirit. That explains why Zuma often called on Africa to invest its most precious resource and its people to ensure for the implementation of Agenda 2063.
Agenda 2063 was very important because, as we know, the decades of the 70s and 90s in Africa were really decades of stagnation, decades of coups, decades that saw Africa being underdeveloped, marginalized, bad governance, despite the fact that Africa is so rich in mineral resources, in its people, in productive land, diverse ecosystems, oil and gas, flora and fauna. The paradox is that, yes, Africa is rich, but the Africans are still poor. So how are we going about to create this prosperous Africa? Clearly, we have to use the resources we have.
Zuma repeatedly urged Africans to scale up inclusive growth and sustainable development, and they should be politically united based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism. During her tenure at the AU, Zuma also took pushing measures that promote gender equality through realizing the importance of empowering women across the continent.
At all levels, empowerment of women is critical. Critical not only for them, but critical for future generations. But I must also say that there are still lots of struggles, even at the workplace, that women have to go through. The conditions of work, sometimes sexual harassment, sometimes less pay for equal work. And so these are the struggles that we still have to look at.
Zuma is a recipient of the honorary doctorates from various international universities, and she has received various awards for her immense contribution on her career.
Now, moving on, studies reveal that Africa's poor infrastructure cuts national economic growth by 2% annually and reduces productivity as much as 40%. The LAPSSET project bears a new horizon to boost East Africa and the region's trade and economic ties, as well as to Aspire Agenda 2063. Take a look at the following story.
Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Sudan have recently reaffirmed their adherence to moving forward with the LAPSSET Corridor program, a massive $25 billion infrastructure project in East Africa. The Lamu Port South Sudan-Ethiopia Transport Corridor program, which begins in Lamu, Kenya, remains the region's largest and most ambitious infrastructure project, uniting the three countries together with essential infrastructural projects such as ports, highways, railways, an oil pipeline, and airport. In a recent meeting for the project, continental integration relied on consistent provision of infrastructure, further indicating the coming together of the African states and leaders towards achieving the goal. Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Sudan share a common goal of achieving economic growth and prosperity. Closing the infrastructure gap should be a priority for all three countries, emphasizing this to be accomplished through regional cooperation and determined action. The $25 billion infrastructure LAPSSET Corridor project, which will link Kenya with Ethiopia, Uganda, and South Sudan, has its headquarters in Magogoni in Kenya's historic coastal town of Lamu. The far-reaching project involves a railway, a highway, a crude oil pipeline and a fiber optic cable connecting the four countries. The project will also include several airports, resort cities, an oil refinery, a 32-berth port in Lamu, and other supporting infrastructure mini-projects. Africa faces challenges such as youth unemployment, low intra-African trade and industrialization, and inefficient agriculture. He also revealed that the other major issue, and the reason for the recent meeting, is the poor infrastructure that connects the African continent, and it is for this reason that they believe LAPSSET and similar programs will play a critical role in reversing the challenges that Africa face today. For Africa to realize its potential for regional integration through transformative regional infrastructure, harmonization of monitoring policies and standards, removal of tariff and non-tariff barriers, and improving business ambience, must remain an area of particular focus for everyone on the continent. Once completed, the LAPSSET Railway will connect to West Africa's Douala, Lagos-Cotonou-Abidjan corridor, running through Cameroon, Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire respectively. Experts view the LAPSSET project as a major contribution to the African Union's regional integration vision of a peaceful, prosperous and fully integrated continent by 2063. In fact, during the 2015 AU General Assembly, African leaders endorsed the project under the AU's Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative. Admission into Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative signals that the project is critical to the continent's regional integration aspiration. Kenya is spearheading the development of the LAPSSET Corridor project to strengthen the country's position as a gateway and a transport and logistics hub to the East African sub-region and the Great Lakes region to facilitate trade, promote regional economic integration and interconnectivity between African countries.
Colorful Cape Town is one of the most multiracial cities in the world. The city sits on South Africa's Cape Peninsula, where the waters of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans converge, and spectacular mountains tumble towards the sea. For decades, Cape Town has been buffeted too by the crosswinds of social upheaval. But just like those early ships, Cape Town had endured some of history's most turbulent waters and set course to an optimistic future. Cape Town's central area is situated in the City Bowl. This amphitheater-shaped area begins at the edge of Table Bay and is backed by the iconic 2-mile-long plateau of Table Mountain. Post-apartheid South Africa is often called the Rainbow Nation, and like a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, diversity, transformation, and creativity shines out from the city's downtown streets, from its businesses, from its very walls. So come and savor the colors, hope, and freedom of Cape Town.
Welcome back. You're still watching Addis News Hour. Now, the Organization of the African Unity was established to encourage economic integration among member states. And the vast continent of 54 nations remains far from economically integrated to this date. A scholar approached by ETV proposes that economic integration should take time and follow a more or less gradualist approach. Shagawi Mata reports.
The Organization of African Unity, OAU, was established on 25 May 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. One of the key aims of the continental body was to encourage economic integration among member states and to eradicate neocolonialism from the African continent. Economic integration among African countries is one of the tenets within Agenda 2063 embraced by the African Union. However, the continent is only lagging behind in its performance regarding economic integration. In an exclusive interview with ETV, Jonas Adaye, Associate Professor and Peace Studies at Addis Ababa University, noted that economic integration should follow a gradualist approach. According to Yona, the continent needs strong and viable economic communities to take roots before embarking on continent-wide integration.
It is a gradualist approach. So that gradual approach means RECs, regional economic communities, regional mechanisms. When these gradually gain ground, when they get strengthened, when they had deep roots into society, what it means to come together, to have one passport, to have one united Africa, how our problems can be tackled when we are united, then this definitely takes time. So it does not once flare up and the next go down, but rather it is a very gradual process. And I'm sure, definitely sure, we have come to concrete reality that unless we are united, we are exposed to, as we have already mentioned a moment ago, to new colonialism, to another scramble for African.
The scholar recalled that to realize Agenda 2063 in general and economic integration in particular, the continent needs to do away with colonized mindset of African citizens and replace it with African values.
Africa's history, particularly modern history, is very much related to colonial history. Africa has been colonized not only materially, not only material exploitation or resource exploitation, but also the mind has been colonized. African citizens were taught, brainwashed, to believe that everything non-African is better. The white or the West is far better than what they have, not appreciating their own values. So this colonized mind itself is a problem to begin with. Unless the mind itself is decolonized, liberated, it is very difficult, to be honest, to talk about liberation or freedom.
The 35th African Union Summit, which will be held in Addis Ababa on February 5 to 6, 2022, is expected to pass strong resolutions on economic ties between member states.
Now, the African Union has been getting its funding from foreign partners such as the EU and individual countries. And these external funding did have a higher impact on the African Union's agenda setting for decades. And in the colonial era, Africans were denied economic independence, which continues till current days. Tigastar Nisa has compiled the following story.
Figures that go in ending the efforts. Since then, the figure has nearly doubled. In 2018, the budget was $7 billion, while only 27% of that budget was contribution from member countries. However, in 2018, the organization is keen on cutting.
Well, I think the problem that the MADAD, those are things we must look at and be able to say Europe is...
The domestic issues of African countries during the time of colonialism, which the then Western powers managed to divide and rule the entire continent irrespective of their geopolitical interests.
They spent 4 months, 4 cold months in Berlin, Germany, from November of 1884 to February of 1885. And by the time they were done, our Africa had been chopped up into the tiny little countries that we see today. Countries that were intentionally divided in such a way that individually they will never survive. That individually they are easy to exploit. The whole purpose was to see to it that they can continue to exploit the rich natural resources that we were endowed with in our beloved continent. A united Africa is an Africa that is difficult to exploit. An Africa that speaks with one voice is an Africa that is difficult to exploit. So it is what they came up with, their strategy of 1884 during the Berlin Conference, is what gave us the Africa that we have today.
The former colonies of the African continent tried to grow a weaker African economy and unity. And this imperialist mindset that was brought by colonialism never left Africa even after the independence of some African nations indirectly.
You see, you got to understand that when we were under colonization, the companies that ran the economies of all African countries were companies that belonged to the colonizer. If a country was colonized by the British, the majority of the companies that controlled the economies of those countries were British. If you were colonized by the Germans, German companies. If you were colonized by the French, French companies, and so forth. That, my brothers and sisters, they never give up. They still continue to control the economies of their former colonies to this day. Let's go back and summarize where we are so far. The issues of the root. They messed with our mind. Berlin Conference. They divided us up, chopped up into tiny little economies that simply cannot survive on their own. And thirdly, in the name of giving us liberation, they never actually left our beloved continent. Economic liberation was denied the Africans to this day.
More than half of the AU's budget is being financed by external actors. This has been an ongoing trend for the past 2 decades. Figures show that fewer than 40% of AU member states actually pay their contribution to the institution. As long as these shortfalls persist, the AU's financial independence will remain a pipe dream. The AU is becoming a stronger actor in peace operations, and its coordination with the United Nations Security Council is increasing its prominence in this area. However, the financing of peace operations remains problematic. As per the whole African countries suffer from indirect economic tyranny of the imperialists, African Union need to forward mechanisms of liberating the Union from external funding, which will be able to unshackle agenda setting, decision making, and on top of that, permanent representations of Africans in the Security Council, for this will help the voice of Africa to be heard loud and clear.
And now in business, Ethio Telecom has collected 28 million birr revenue in 6 months that make up the first half of the budget year. The lone telecom provider has briefed the media on its business performance for the period of 1st July to December 2021. On the occasion, the CEO of Ethio Telecom, Frehewa Tamru, stated that the company has been undertaking a wide range of projects and operations to expand telecom infrastructures and systems, improve the quality of service, and increase the outreach of benefits to the community. In the first half of the budget year, Ethio Telecom has generated a total of 28 billion birr revenue, which is 86.4% of the target and 6.7% of increment from the previous budget year, similar period, the CEO said. And now let's take a look at the exchange rates of some foreign currencies. And now in our continental news, West African leaders working together under the regional bloc ECOWAS are under pressure to stop the wave of military takeovers recently seen in the region. And there have been 3 coups over the last 90 months that toppled the government of Mali, Guinea, and lately Burkina Faso. Goshumel has more on that from CGTN.
It all started in Mali on the 18th of August 2020 when a group of soldiers toppled the elected government. Nearly a year later, there was another military takeover. This time in Guinea again, a group of soldiers sacked the government of Alpha Conde and took control of the affairs of the country. And in the latest incident, the Burkina Faso military seized power on the 24th of January. The soldiers were led by 41-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba. Analysts now fear a warring trend is taking shape in the West African sub-region.
With the spate of, I would say, frustration, the unemployment that has been generated over the years, and the inability of the political class to stem conflicts in those countries where conflicts have been the order of the day. These have provided ready weapons for the military to use as a basis for providing an excuse for intervention in the political lives of their countries. And so it is dire for the African continent, especially West Africa.
Regional body ECOWAS has come under the spotlight over what action it is taking against the coup plotters to restore democracy in the affected countries. Its response so far has been to impose wide-ranging sanctions on the countries while demanding a swift return to democracy. But so far, it doesn't appear the strategy is working.
What the present situation in West Africa especially indicates is the failure of the kind of diplomacy that ECOWAS has brought to play. The issue of sanctions. If sanctions were working and were effective, then you will not have, the same thing being replicated in other West African countries like we have just seen in Burkina Faso. Unless they want to keep on doing the same thing and hoping for a different result, which is not going to happen, ECOWAS has to be ingenious. ECOWAS has to look for other ways.
ECOWAS has found itself in a very difficult situation where, in most instances, it's the people themselves who are welcoming the coup d'etat. Like what we've seen in Burkina Faso, the people came out on the street and were jubilating, showing that they were not happy with the, now unseated government.
Sentiments against ECOWAS are already built up in the countries where coups have taken place. They have been protesting against the sanctions, with citizens demanding their removal.
There are hard positions that will just have to be taken, otherwise we're going to have a total reversal of the gains, the democratic gains that have been made in the West African sub-region in the past 2 decades. So something much harder has to be done.
A number of countries in the region like Nigeria battling their own security challenges. ECOWAS doesn't seem to have the appetite for the use of force to restore democracy in the co-affected countries, and it appears the coup plotters know this. They are using it to their own advantage for now.
And finally, let's take a quick look at the weather updates of some African nations, and I'll be right back. And now a quick reminder of the top stories. Pan-Africanism said to be instrumental for meaningful integration. And African Union financial independence dubbed a precondition to effectively advance African agendas. Well, with that, we come to the end of today's stories. Many thanks for watching us, and bye-bye.